Hello everyone, tonight I've got 3 special scary stories for all of you. So before that, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Creepy Sinister, and don't forget to comment below and tell me where you're from and what time you're watching. Now get comfortable and let's begin. Story 1. This happened during my drive across West Texas on I-10 outside Sonora. Everyone was afraid of what was outside, but my fear came from inside my own house. At the time, house was a generous word for what I had. I was 26, freshly single, and I'd packed everything I owned into the back of my old Honda Civic. I'd been crashing wherever I could, sleeping in the driver's seat when I ran out of money, telling myself it was temporary and kind of freeing. Out there, the car felt like a little bubble I could lock from the inside, like nothing could get in as long as I kept moving. That night, I was running on caffeine and stubbornness, trying to make good time before my phone lost service again. I remember the road being so dark it didn't even feel real, like the headlights were the only thing keeping the world in place. There were long stretches with no streetlights, no houses, no other cars, just scrubland and low hills blending into the black. Every once in a while, a reflective sign would flash past and disappear behind me like it had never been there. I needed gas badly, and I could feel my stomach tightening the way it always did when the needle dropped close to empty. I kept telling myself I'd find something soon, but the exits were few, and the ones I passed looked abandoned. Then I saw the green and white glow of a 24-hour Chevron sign in the distance, hovering over the highway like a little island. I took the off-ramp, and the second I left the main road, the darkness got even thicker, like the highway had been the last connected vein to the rest of the world. The station sat alone in a flat patch of dirt and brush, surrounded by nothing but open land. No streetlights, no nearby buildings, not even a row of other businesses. Just the Chevron, its canopy lights buzzing, and a small kiosk with tinted windows that reflected my headlights back at me. The parking lot was mostly empty except for an old semi parked way off to the side, facing away like it didn't want to be seen. I pulled up to a pump near the front, shut off my car, and sat there for a second, listening. You know that feeling when you step out somewhere and it's so quiet you can hear your own blood moving? That's what it was like. The air smelled like dust and fuel, and somewhere out in the scrubland, something small rustled, then stopped like it noticed me noticing it. I checked the time on my phone out of habit, but I had no signal, and it just showed the last time it had synced earlier in the evening. That should have been my sign to get gas and leave fast. Instead, I got out and walked around to the pump, feeling the cold metal under my fingers when I grabbed the nozzle. The pump screen glowed blue, and for a second it looked normal. I put my card in, pulled it out, and waited for it to read. The screen flashed a few prompts, then asked for my zip code. I typed it in. The pump beeped, and the display reset to 0 like it was ready. I squeezed the handle and heard that familiar click and whir as the gas started flowing. It was comforting in a dumb way, like a normal sound in a place that didn't feel normal at all. Then maybe 10 seconds in, the pump stopped. Not like it was full. My tank was nowhere near full. It just cut off hard and the numbers on the display flickered. Before I could even react, the whole thing reset. The gallons went back to 0. The dollars went back to 0. The screen flashed the welcome message again like I'd never started. I stared at it for a second, confused, then squeezed the handle again. It started pumping like nothing happened. I figured it was one of those annoying pumps that shuts off if the nozzle angle is weird, so I adjusted my grip and tried to keep it steady. I watched the numbers climb, trying to make myself relax. It stopped again, same thing. A sharp cut-off, a flicker, and the pump reset right back to 0. That's when the speaker above the pump crackled. It was one of those little box speakers built into the canopy, the kind stations used to tell people the pump is prepay or that they're on camera. At first, it was just static, like someone accidentally hit the button. Then, through the noise, I heard a voice, low and close to the mic. Sean. I froze so fast the nozzle almost slipped out of my hand. I didn't even think about how weird it was that the station somehow had my first name. I just felt my skin tighten and my ears ring like my body was bracing for something. The voice didn't sound loud. It sounded quiet, like it didn't need to be loud because it wasn't far away. I glanced toward the kiosk windows. They were dark, tinted, and the bright canopy lights made them mirror-like. I could see my own shape, my hoodie, my hands, the nozzle. I couldn't see anyone inside. The door was shut, and there was a small sign near it that said open, but it looked old, like it had been there for years. I tried to reason it out fast. My name was on my card. Maybe some employee saw it on the register screen and thought it would be funny to mess with me. Maybe there was a glitch with the speaker system, and it played some recorded message meant for someone else. It was late, and I was tired, and my brain wanted something normal to grab onto. So I forced out a nervous laugh, like the kind you do when you're not sure if you're supposed to be scared yet. I looked up at the speaker and said, "Yeah." No answer, just the faint hiss of static, then silence. I decided I didn't care enough to make a big deal out of it. I just wanted gas. I squeezed the handle again and the pump started. The numbers climbed, 1 gallon, 2 gallons, and I kept my eyes on the display, like watching it would stop it from acting weird. It reset again, back to 0. The speaker crackled again, softer this time, like whoever was using it didn't want the sound to carry. Sean. My stomach dropped, not because it was my name again, but because it sounded like the exact same tone, the exact same spacing between syllables. It didn't sound like a person reacting in real time. It sounded like a clip being played, but it also didn't sound like a cheerful pre-recorded message. It sounded like someone saying my name the way you do when you're right behind someone and you want them to turn around. I turned around anyway. The lot behind me was empty. My car sat there with the driver's door still closed, my little rolling house with all my stuff inside. Beyond that was the dark scrubland, flat and endless, with nothing moving. The semi-truck at the far edge of the lot was still there, dark and silent, no lights, no movement in the cab. I was suddenly very aware of how alone I was. The highway felt far away now, even though I could probably see the faint glow of passing headlights in the distance. The chevron lights made a bright circle around me, and everything beyond that circle looked like it could hide anything. I pulled the nozzle out and set it back in the pump like I was done, even though I was. I grabbed my keys and took a couple steps toward the kiosk, thinking maybe I should just go inside and pay, or at least see if someone was actually in there. The closer I got, the more I could hear a faint humming sound coming from inside, like electronics running. The door had a little push bar, and above it, a camera pointed straight down at the entrance. I could see the camera lens glinting. I lifted my hand to knock, but before my knuckles touched the glass, the receipt printer on the pump behind me suddenly whirred to life. It wasn't a gentle little print. It was fast and loud, like it was spitting something out urgently. I snapped my head back and walked to the pump. A long strip of receipt paper was hanging out of the slot, fluttering slightly in the breeze. My first thought was that it printed an error message, like "See cashier." But when I grabbed it and looked down, it wasn't an error. It was a normal-looking receipt with the Chevron logo and a transaction total. Except the total didn't make sense. It showed 0 gallons, $0, like nothing had been pumped at all. And the time printed at the top wasn't the time my phone showed earlier. It was a time that hadn't happened yet. It said the transaction took place at 2:08 a.m. I stared at it, blinking like that would make it change. I didn't even know what time it actually was, but I knew it wasn't 2:08 a.m. because I'd been driving for hours and I'd stopped at a rest area earlier, and I remembered the clock there. My brain started doing that panicky math where it tries to pin down reality using little scraps of memory. Then the speaker crackled again, and for the first time, it said more than my name. 203, the voice whispered like it was reading something. 204. I looked up at the canopy speaker, my mouth slightly open, and a chill ran down my back, because the voice wasn't guessing. It wasn't asking. It sounded like someone keeping track. I pulled my phone out again and stared at it, willing it to show a real time, still no service. I turned it off and back on. It took forever to restart, and the whole time I felt exposed, like the glow of the screen made me easier to see. When it finally came back on, the time popped up in the corner, 2:03 a.m. I felt my chest tighten. I looked back down at the receipt, 2:08 a.m., 5 minutes ahead. I laughed again, but this time it came out wrong, like a cough. I told myself it was just a printer glitch. Maybe the station's clock was wrong. Maybe it was set ahead. That was a thing that happened sometimes, right? But my hands were shaking slightly, and I couldn't stop staring at that future time like it was daring me to wait and see what happened. The voice came again, softer, Sean. I stood there in the pool of light, holding the receipt like it was evidence of something I couldn't explain. I looked at the kiosk again, still no visible worker, no movement behind the tinted glass, and yet the speaker was working, the printer was working, the pump was working just enough to mess with me. I made a decision that felt smart and stupid at the same time. I decided to wait, just for a minute, because if the receipt time was wrong, then nothing would happen. And if the receipt time was somehow right, I didn't even know what that would mean, but I couldn't stop myself from wanting to know. So I got back in my car and locked the doors. The click of the lock sounded loud in the quiet lot. I put the receipt on my lap and watched the pump through the windshield. The canopy lights made the world outside my car look harsh and flat, like a stage set. At 2:04 a.m., the pump screen lit up again by itself. I hadn't touched it. The display reset to 0 like someone had started a new transaction. Then the speaker crackled. 2:04, the voice murmured. My throat went dry. I leaned forward, staring hard like I'd see a hand reaching out from the pump. Nothing was there. The lot was still empty. The kiosk door was still shut. At 2:05 a.m., the pump clicked. The nozzle handle twitched slightly in its cradle, not enough to fall, but enough to look wrong, like something had bumped it from the other side. My skin prickled. The speaker whispered 2:05. I told myself it was wind, but there wasn't enough wind. The hanging receipt paper barely moved. At 2:06 a.m., my car's interior light flickered. Just once, like it got a weak pulse, then went back to normal. I hadn't opened a door. I hadn't touched the light switch. My heart started thudding in my ears, and my hands tightened around the steering wheel without me meaning to. Then I looked down at the receipt again, and my stomach dropped so hard I felt it in my legs. Under the printed time, there was a line I hadn't noticed before. It looked like a standard message you'd see at the bottom of a receipt, but it was "Thank you" or "Come again." It said, "Do not go inside." I stared at that line until the words blurred. My brain kept trying to tell me it was a prank, some stupid joke. Maybe the station employee was bored and thought it would be funny to scare a late-night customer. But the message was so plain and so direct that it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a warning from someone who didn't have time to explain. And right after that line, another one. "He is in Taichuari with me." The air in my car felt suddenly thin. I looked at the kiosk like it might breathe. The tinted windows reflected the canopy lights and my car's silhouette, and behind that it was just darkness. But now I couldn't stop imagining someone inside, pressed low behind the counter, looking out through a crack I couldn't see. Someone holding the speaker button down, whispering my name, trying to keep their voice from shaking. At 2:07 a.m., the kiosk door handle moved. It wasn't a full turn, just a slight jiggle like someone tested it and stopped. The speaker crackled and the voice whispered, "Deshaun," slower this time, like it was begging me to understand. I locked my doors again even though they were already locked. My hands were sweating so much the wheel felt slick. I fumbled for my phone and opened the emergency call screen, but then I hesitated because what was I going to say? "Hi, I'm at a Chevron and a receipt told me the future." The rational part of me tried to come back. Maybe I was tired, maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe I'd somehow printed an old receipt someone left there and my brain was stitching things together. I needed something solid to anchor to. So I did the dumbest thing possible. I opened my car door a crack and stepped out, keeping one foot inside like I could dive back in if I needed to. I held the receipt in my hand and stared at the kiosk door. At that exact moment, the receipt printer whirred again. A fresh strip of paper spat out. I didn't move at first. I just watched it hang there, new and clean and bright in the light. Then I walked over slowly and pulled it free, my fingers trembling so hard the paper crinkled. This receipt was shorter. The top still had the Chevron logo. The time at the top now said 2:09 a.m., 1 minute ahead. And beneath it, in the same plain text, it said, "Run to your car now." I didn't wait. My body moved before my brain finished reading. I turned and sprinted back, yanking my car door open and throwing myself inside. I slammed it shut so hard the whole car shook. The second the door latched, something hit the outside of my driver's window. Not a gentle tap, a hard, flat smack like a palm. I jerked my head toward it, and for a split second I saw a face inches from the glass. Not pressed like in movies, not distorted, just there, lit by the canopy lights, eyes wide and focused like they'd been waiting for that exact moment. Then it dropped out of view, too fast and too close, like it crouched down beside my door. I couldn't breathe. My hands fumbled with the keys, and it felt like they didn't fit anymore. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine coughed, then started. Another smack hit the glass, this time lower, near the handle, like whoever it was testing where the lock was weakest. My whole body flooded with heat and cold at once. I threw the car into reverse and backed out so hard my tires chirped. As I swung around, my headlights swept across the kiosk entrance. The door was open now, wide open. And in that doorway, for just a second, I saw two shapes. One stood upright, tall and still, like it didn't need to hurry. The other was lower, hunched, like someone was trying to stay out of sight while still looking out. Then my headlights moved past, and the moment was gone. I punched the gas and sped out of the lot, gravel popping under my tires. I didn't stop until I was back on I-10, merging into the empty highway like I was escaping a pocket of reality that didn't want to let me go. My heart wouldn't slow down, and my hands kept shaking so badly I could barely keep the car straight. A few miles down, I forced myself to breathe and glanced at the receipt again, the one that told me to run. The ink looked slightly smeared now, like it hadn't fully dried, even though it should have. I told myself to toss it, to get rid of it like it was cursed paper, but I couldn't. It felt like the only proof that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. I drove until I saw another cluster of lights in the distance, a different exit with a diner and a station that had other cars around it. I pulled into a lit area near the diner and parked under a street lamp where I could see people inside through the windows. My hands were still shaking, but at least the world looked normal again. I called the non-emergency line and tried to explain without sounding insane. I told them I'd been at a Chevron outside Sonora and something was wrong, that I thought someone might be in danger inside the kiosk. The dispatcher asked me for the address, and I had to admit I didn't know it, just a Chevron off I-10. They told me they'd send someone to check, but their tone was flat, like they heard drunk road stories every night. I sat in my car and waited, staring at the receipts in my lap. After a while, I looked down at the first one again, the one that started all of it, the one that printed 5 minutes into the future. The time at the top still said 2:08 a.m. But there was a new line at the very bottom, like it had been added after the fact. The ink was darker, fresher, like it had just been printed. It was my name again, and under it only 4 words. You were supposed to come. Story 2. It was the first long drive home from Atlanta I spent completely alone. I thought the silence would be peaceful, until I realized it wasn't silence at all. I was 24 at the time, and I'd just moved a little outside the city to save money. My friends liked to joke that I lived in the trees, because my apartment complex backed up to a patch of woods and everything got dark fast once the sun went down. That night I'd stayed late at work in Midtown, and by the time I hit the highway, the city lights were already fading behind me. I remember feeling proud of myself for handling it all on my own, like this was what being an adult was supposed to feel like. My car was a hand-me-down, an older sedan with slightly tinted windows and a trunk that never opened on the first try. The inside always smelled like whatever air freshener I'd bought that week, mixed with old fabric and warm plastic from the day's heat. I had my phone mounted on the dash with directions running, volume low, just enough to catch the next turn. The roads were mostly empty, but not in a peaceful way. More like the kind of empty where you start noticing every pair of headlights in your mirror. About 10 minutes into the drive, I got that uncomfortable feeling like I was being watched. Not dramatic, not like a movie, just a small shift in my body where my shoulders tightened and I kept checking my mirrors. A dark SUV had been behind me for a while, matching my speed. I told myself it was normal because everyone goes the same way leaving the city and I was probably just tired. Still, I changed lanes, then changed back just to see if it would do the same. It did. I tried not to panic. I kept driving like everything was fine, but my heart was tapping against my ribs and I could feel heat in my face. When my phone announced the next exit, I didn't take it, even though it was my usual one. I took the following exit instead, the one with more lights and more businesses, because I wanted to be around people. That's how I ended up at the Shell station on the edge of Atlanta, the one that always looked crowded no matter what time it was. It was one of those big stations with bright white lights that make everything look a little too sharp. There were cars at almost every pump, and the convenience store windows were glowing with neon beer signs and lottery ads. Off to the side, the car wash lane wrapped behind the building, disappearing into a darker area where the lights didn't reach as well. I pulled in and chose a pump right in front, close to the entrance, because I wanted to be visible on as many cameras as possible. When I parked, I glanced in my mirror again, and the dark SUV rolled past the entrance slowly, like it was deciding whether to follow me in. Then it kept going. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands were shaky when I got out and started pumping gas, and I tried to act normal, like I wasn't standing there listening to every sound around me. A couple argued by a minivan 2 pumps over. A guy in a hoodie leaned against a truck, scrolling on his phone. It should have made me feel safe, all those people so close, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. While the tank filled, I looked around again, and that's when I saw him. He was standing near the ice freezer by the front of the store, not even pretending to browse. He wasn't holding a drink or a snack, just standing there half in the reflection of the glass, staring straight at my car. The light above him buzzed slightly, and every time it flickered, his face looked different for a split second, like my eyes couldn't settle on the details. He was tall and thin, wearing dark jeans and a jacket that looked too heavy for the weather. What got me was how still he was, like he'd been waiting in that exact spot. At first, I thought maybe he recognized someone in a similar car. My sedan wasn't rare, but it wasn't that common either. I stepped slightly to the side, giving him a clear view of me, expecting him to look away like people do when they get caught starring. He didn't. His eyes stayed locked on the driver's side window, like he was watching the inside of my car, not me. I finished pumping, clicked the nozzle back, and forced myself to walk calmly around the front of my car. I didn't want to get back in right away. I stood there for a second, pretending to check something on my phone, and I watched him through my peripheral vision. He finally moved, but not toward the store like a normal customer. He drifted along the front windows, staying just inside the bright light, keeping an angle where he could still see my car. My stomach dropped in that slow, sinking way, like when an elevator starts going down. I told myself I was overreacting. The station was crowded. There were cameras. If something happened, people would see. I repeated those thoughts like a chant while I walked back to my door. When I opened the driver's side door, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't my air freshener. It wasn't gas. It was cold, stale cigarette smoke, like someone had been sitting in the car for a while with the windows cracked. I don't smoke, and nobody who rode in my car smoked either. For a second, I just froze with my hand still on the door, staring at the steering wheel like it might explain it. Then I heard it. A slow, steady breathing sound right behind my headrest. It wasn't loud, but it was close. Close enough that I could almost feel warmth on the back of my neck, even though the air inside the car felt chilled. My whole body turned to ice. I didn't swing around. I didn't scream. My brain didn't give me anything dramatic like that. It gave me one clear thought, and it was, don't get in. I backed away from the door as quietly as I could and shut it without slamming. My legs felt weak, like I was about to fold, but I forced myself to keep moving. I walked fast toward the store entrance, and as I did, I glanced toward the ice freezer. The man was gone. I pushed into the store and the bell above the door chimed, loud and cheerful, like it belonged in a normal night. The air inside smelled like hot dogs and spilled soda. The cashier, a tired-looking guy behind thick glass, barely glanced up. I stood near a rack of chips, trying to breathe like a normal person, trying to decide if I was going to call the police or just run back to my car and drive away anyway. That's when I noticed something that made it worse. From where I stood inside the store, I could see my car through the window, and I could see a shape in the backseat just barely, like a shadow sitting up behind the passenger seat. The windows were tinted, so it wasn't clear, but it was there. It shifted slightly, like whoever it was leaning forward listening. I walked up to the cashier's window and tried to keep my voice steady. I told him I thought someone was in my car. He stared at me for a second like he didn't believe me, then he leaned and looked out the window. He shrugged in a way that made my skin crawl, like this was just another weird thing in his night. He said something like, "You want me to call somebody," but he didn't even pick up the phone. I stepped away and called 911 myself, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I kept my eyes on my car the whole time, watching for movement. The dispatcher asked for my location and what I saw, and I tried to explain the breathing, the smell, the shape. I expected sirens right away, but what I got was that calm, slow voice telling me to stay inside and wait. While I waited, I looked around the store for someone who looked like they might help. A couple of guys were buying beer, laughing like they were having a normal night. A woman was paying for a pack of gum, not looking at anyone. I wanted to grab someone and beg them to come outside with me, but I didn't. Something in me didn't want to make a scene, which sounds stupid now, but in the moment, I felt like if I did anything wrong, it would push whatever was happening into something worse. The next thing I noticed was the car wash lane. From the front window, I could see it wrapping behind the building, darker and quieter than the pumps, and I saw a figure walking through that shadowed stretch, heading toward the back of the station. It was the same tall shape, moving with no rush, like he had all the time in the world. He disappeared behind the corner of the building, right where the car wash lane curved out of sight. It hit me then that this wasn't random. The man at the ice freezer hadn't just been watching me. He'd been watching to see when I'd leave my car unlocked or when I'd be distracted, and the person in my backseat wasn't panicking either. They weren't trying to hide anymore, they were just waiting. I don't know how long it took for the police to arrive, but it felt like forever. When the patrol car finally pulled in, the relief I felt was so strong it almost made me cry. 2 officers walked into the store and I rushed over, talking too fast, pointing out the window at my car. They listened, but their faces had that look that said they'd already decided this was probably nothing. They walked outside with me, hands near their belts, scanning the lot. One of them shined a flashlight through my back window. For a second I was sure the beam would catch someone's eyes staring back, but the light swept over empty seats, empty floor, and the mess of fast food napkins I'd left in the back. The officer tried the rear passenger door handle, then opened it. Nothing. I stood there staring, feeling dizzy, like my brain couldn't accept what my eyes were seeing. The cigarette smell was still there, faint but real. I told them I'd heard breathing. I told them I saw a shape. They checked the trunk, the underside of the car, even the space between the seats, like someone could fold themselves into it. Then one officer asked me if I'd been drinking or taking anything, and the way he said it made my face burn. The other officer walked over to the cashier and asked to see the camera footage. The cashier shook his head and said the cameras were for show, like that was a normal thing to admit. He said the system hadn't worked right in months and nobody had fixed it. The officer looked annoyed but not surprised. He came back and told me they couldn't do much if there was no suspect and nobody was actually caught in the car. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to tell them the suspect was right there somewhere watching this whole thing. But all that came out was a weak, so what do I do? One of them told me to drive home and call again if anything else happened. He said it like he was giving me advice about a flat tire. They left and I stood there in the bright station lights, feeling more exposed than I had when I was alone. I didn't want to get back in my car, I didn't want to go anywhere. But the station suddenly felt like a stage, and I had this horrible sense that whoever had been in my backseat hadn't gone far. They just slipped away when the store door chimed, or when I called the police, or when they realized the attention was shifting. I got in anyway because I didn't know what else to do. Before I started the engine, I checked every seat, every corner, the floor behind me, even the trunk release, like I could catch some clue that would make it make sense. The cigarette smell clung to the upholstery like a memory. I locked the doors and pulled out of the station fast, not bothering to look cool or calm. I took the long way home, making random turns, watching my mirrors so much my eyes hurt. Every time headlights appeared behind me, my stomach tightened. I kept the interior light off and the music off so I could hear if anything changed. My phone kept trying to reroute me back to the fastest road, but I ignored it and drove wherever the streets were brightest. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, I didn't park in my usual spot near the trees. I parked right under a streetlight, close to the leasing office where the security sign was posted. I sat there for a full minute with the engine running, just listening. The silence felt too thin, like it could tear if I moved wrong. The next morning, when the sun was up and everything looked normal again, I went back out to my car with a flashlight and checked it one more time. That's when I found something I'd missed in the dark. On the backseat floor, tucked halfway under the passenger seat, was a single crushed cigarette butt. It wasn't old, it wasn't dusty. It looked fresh, like it had been dropped there hours ago, and it didn't match the kind my coworkers smoked. I just stared at it for a long time, holding it between two fingers like it might bite me. I threw it away and told myself it was over. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a close call, a nightmare I could put behind me if I was more careful. But sometimes when I'm driving alone at night and I stop at a light, I catch a smell that doesn't belong in my car. Cold cigarettes, faint but unmistakable. And every time it happens, I find myself staring at my backseat in the mirror, waiting to see a shadow sit up behind the headrest again. Story 3. Back in rural Pine Ridge, Arkansas, I worked the night shift at a gas station. I used to think the scariest thing I'd see was a drunk customer. I was wrong. It was one of those stations that looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. 2 pumps out front, a flickering yellow sign, and a gravel lot that turned into mud every time it rained. Behind the pumps was a little cinder block building with the restrooms, separate from the store, like the owner didn't want anyone bringing whatever happened in there back inside. Most nights were quiet, which was good, because I was usually alone from midnight until the morning shift showed up. The only other person with me was the clerk inside, an older guy named Dale who handled the register and lottery tickets. He barely talked to me, and when he did, it was always in this flat voice like he was reading off a script. He'd sit behind the counter with a small TV playing low and a coffee that never seemed to get cold. The first week I worked there, he told me the restroom doors stayed locked because people trashed them, and if anyone needed in, we had to buzz them. Around 1:40 a.m. one night, I took a couple trash bags out to the dumpster on the side of the building. The air had that damp pine smell, and the highway was so empty you could hear the insects in the weeds. When I came back, I realized I'd left my keys inside, and Dale had already locked the front door like he always did after midnight. I knocked on the glass and waved, and he didn't even look up at first, like he was pretending he couldn't hear me. He finally pressed a button under the counter, and the door clicked open. I stepped in annoyed and said, "Seriously?" He just shrugged without meeting my eyes. I was about to walk behind the counter to grab my keys, but my stomach dropped in that way where you know you're not going to make it another minute. I asked if I could use the restroom before I got back to stalking, and Dale nodded and hit the restroom buzzer without even asking which one. I walked out to the restroom building behind the pumps, and the metal door made that heavy, sticky sound when it opened, like the hinges were tired. The inside smelled like old bleach and damp concrete. One overhead light buzzed and threw shadows into the corners, and the mirror over the sink was so scratched it looked cloudy. I stepped into the women's stall and pulled the door shut behind me. The second it latched, something felt off. I turned back to lock it, and my hand hit nothing but smooth metal. There wasn't a handle, not a knob, not a latch you could slide, nothing. Just a flat plate where a handle should have been, like it had been ripped off and replaced with a piece of metal to hide it. At first my brain tried to make excuses. Maybe it was one of those doors that only opened from the outside. Maybe it was broken and nobody fixed it. I pushed, then pulled, then pressed my fingers along the seam looking for some hidden catch. The stall was tiny and the air suddenly felt thinner, like the walls moved a little closer. I remember whispering, "Okay, okay," to myself, like saying it out loud would make it less real. Then I heard the outside restroom door open and close. Footsteps crossed the bathroom floor slow and steady. I froze, thinking it was Dale coming to tell me he'd fix it, but it didn't sound like him. These steps had weight to them, like someone taking their time. The footsteps stopped right in front of my stall, and I saw shoes under the gap. They didn't move for a few seconds, and I could tell the person was just standing there, facing the door. That's when a phone slid across the tile and stopped halfway under my stall. The camera was already on, the little red dot glowing. For a second I couldn't even process what I was looking at, like my eyes refused to accept it. Then a voice whispered from just outside the stall, low and sharp, "Don't make noise. He checks the locks." My entire body went cold. I backed up until my calves hit the toilet, trying not to breathe too loud. I wanted to scream, but the way the voice said it made me believe there was some rule in that bathroom I didn't understand yet. The phone's camera angled slightly, like whoever held it wanted to see my feet, wanted proof I was there. I stared at it, and the whisper came again, closer this time. "If he hears you, he'll know you're awake." The footsteps moved away, slow again, like the person wasn't in a hurry. I heard the main restroom door creak open and shut. I was alone, but not really, because I could still feel the camera on me like it had left a mark. My hands shook so bad I could barely pull my own phone out of my pocket. I tried calling Dale first because he was 20 yards away, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted him restroom stall locked, no handle, and watched the message sit there without sending, like the signal couldn't find a way out. I tried 911 next, but it didn't connect either. That's when I realized how rural we really were. Some nights you'd have one bar if you stood near the front window, but in that concrete box behind the pumps there was nothing. I thought about pounding on the stall door, but the whisper kept replaying in my head. "He checks the locks," like this wasn't an accident, like the lock wasn't there to keep people out, it was there to keep someone in. I forced myself to move quietly. I looked for anything I could use as a tool, anything not bolted down. The toilet paper holder was empty and rattled when I touched it, so I left it alone. The stall wall had that thin metal paneling, and when I pressed on it, it flexed a little. I got on the toilet and tried pushing up at the ceiling tile, but it was solid, like it had been replaced with something stronger. That's when I noticed something scratched into the inside of the stall door, low near the bottom, like someone did it while sitting on the floor. It was faint, but I could make out words, "Don't trust the clerk." Under that, there were a few lines that looked like tallies, and next to them were initials and dates, uneven and cramped. One set of initials had been scratched so hard the metal curled. I heard the outside restroom door open again. This time the footsteps were quicker, like whoever it was had a purpose. They walked right up to my stall and stopped. I saw their shadow shift across the gap under the door. Then the stall door moved, not opening, just rattling slightly, like someone testing it with gentle pressure. A man's voice, calm and almost bored, said, "Occupied." I didn't answer, I couldn't. The stall door rattled again, harder this time, and the lock held. The voice didn't change, but it got closer to the seam, like he was speaking directly through the crack. "You in there, sweetheart, everything okay?" I covered my mouth with my hand because I could feel myself starting to sob, and even that seemed too loud. Outside the stall, I heard a soft click, like a key turning or a latch being checked. Then the voice said, quieter, like it was only meant for him, "Good, still tight." Footsteps backed away. I heard the main restroom door close. And then from somewhere outside, I heard the faintest sound of the buzzer box clicking, like someone had just locked the restroom building again from the outside. The realization hit me so hard it made me dizzy. Whoever that was, he wasn't trapped out there with me. He was choosing when the doors stayed locked. I don't know what made me do it, but I slid down to the floor and pressed my ear to the bottom of the stall door, listening. A few seconds later, something slid back under the stall, another phone, or maybe the same one. This time it stopped closer to my face, camera pointed right at me. The screen reflected my own eyes, wide and wet, and behind me on the phone's screen I could see the stall door from the outside and a hand reaching toward it. It wasn't just recording, it was live. Someone was watching me from somewhere else. I grabbed my phone and did the only thing I could think of. I hit record video, pointed it at the stall door, and whispered my name, the date, and where I was, like I was leaving evidence for someone who might find my phone later. Then I took my belt off, looped it through the gap where the handle should have been on the metal plate, and yanked with everything I had. The belt slipped, burned my hands, and I almost screamed. But the metal plate shifted. Not much, just enough to show a thin line of darkness behind it. My heart jumped because it meant there was a mechanism under there, just hidden. I wedged the belt in again, twisted it tighter, and pulled until my shoulders shook. This time something inside snapped with a sharp pop, and the stall door jolted open a few inches. I didn't wait, I shoved through, stumbled into the bathroom, and ran for the main door. It didn't open, it was locked from the outside. I slammed my hands against it anyway, hard enough to sting, and that's when I heard the footsteps again, coming back faster. I turned and ran to the sink, grabbed the metal trash can, and swung it into the small window above the sink. The glass didn't shatter like in movies. It spiderwebbed, then cracked in a loud, ugly way. I hit it again and again until a piece fell out and cold air rushed in. I squeezed my shoulders through the jagged opening, scraping my arms, and dropped into the gravel behind the building. I sprinted barefoot across the lot toward the store, screaming Dale's name now because I didn't care anymore. The front door was locked, but the lights were on, and I could see Dale behind the counter. He looked up at me, really looked up, then slowly stood. He didn't come to the door. He just watched me through the glass, like he was waiting to see what I'd do next. I ran to my car and fumbled my keys so badly I dropped them twice. When I finally got in, I looked back at the restroom building. The side door was open, and a man was standing in the doorway, half in shadow. I couldn't see his face, but I could see his arm lift like he was holding something up at chest level. A phone. I drove straight to the sheriff's office in the next town, shaking so hard I could barely explain what happened. They drove back with me, but by the time we got there, the restroom building was unlocked. The stall had a brand new handle on it, and Dale was gone. The deputies told me maybe I had a panic attack, maybe the handle had always been there and I just didn't notice. They acted like the scratched message inside the stall was kids being kids, and when I asked them to check the station's cameras, they said the system was down for maintenance. I quit that night and never went back, but about a week later I got a text from an unknown number with a single video attachment. It was a clip filmed from under a stall door, angled up at my feet. The audio was clear enough to hear my breathing, and right before the clip ended, a whisper came through the speaker. "Don't make noise," it said, almost amused. "He checks the locks."